Well, it took nearly 2 years, but one of Fox's top anchors finally secured a lengthy sit-down with President Trump. Here's more of the interview with Chris Wallace.
No president has liked his press coverage. John Kennedy in your Oval Office canceled the subscription to the New York Herald Tribune. Nobody called it the enemy of the American people.
Chris, I'm calling the fake news is the enemy. It's fake. It's phony.
But a lot of times, sir, it's just news you don't like.
No, it's not. No. I don't mind getting bad news if I'm wrong.
I sat down with him moments ago on the set of Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace, welcome.
Good to be with you on Media Buzz.
Fascinating interview. The president says, I don't mind getting bad news if I'm wrong. What did you make of that, since the president very rarely admits that he is wrong?
Exactly. I really enjoyed and was anxious to have that part of the interview because I've not done a formal interview with him since December of 2016. Since the tweet about fake news is the enemy of the people, I've thought about it a lot. I've talked about it a lot. I've won press awards and given speeches about it. And I wanted to confront him with my thoughts, which are basically, look, you can criticize the media. You can criticize coverage. I think some of the coverage of you has been biased.
As you pointed out.
But don't call us the enemy of the American people. And then when he tried to sort of separate it and say, well, I'm talking about CNN, I'm not talking about you, it's like I wanted to make the point. We're all in solidarity on this. You know, you want to call specific stories, specific reporters out, go ahead. But don't say that we're the enemy of the people, because we're not.
The president says he's only talking about fake news, but he's also said that fake news is 80% of the media by his calculation. Do you think, did you have the sense that he is deeply offended by the coverage of him, or is it also, or separately, the fact that he uses the press as such an effective foil?
Yes. In other words, both.
Yeah.
I think that he really feels that he's been the victim of bad reporting, and he says, all of our successes get downplayed. And again, I think there's some truth in that. As I have said in some speeches, even hypochondriacs sometimes really get sick. On the other hand, I think that while he does feel in some cases legitimately aggrieved, I think he also thinks that it's a very good talking point. And when he was defending it, he talked in terms of my supporters, and they get it. The fact that there's a lot of good news in the country and it doesn't get reported. I think he sees it absolutely as a kind of wedge issue that helps him at the expense of the media and media criticism, and also the expense of his political opposition.
You asked him about a spate of stories portraying him as being very angry and lashing out since the midterms. The Washington Post called it days of fury. The LA Times, and you quoted this, said he's retreated into a cocoon of bitterness and resentment. Let's take a look.
How dark is your mood?
It's very light. It's fake news. It's disgusting fake news. I read a front page story in the Washington Post. They never even call me. Nobody ever calls me. You know, they hear. I don't even think they have sources. I think they just make it up like it's fiction.
These are two of his favorite lines, that many of the sources are made up and that nobody ever calls me, as if a reporter can just call up and get the president on the line very quickly.
Right.
And the Washington Post did quote a senior White House official on his behalf in that particular piece.
Right. First of all, it was the first question I asked because, one, I was legitimately interested. I also thought, you know, there's a lot of tough stuff I wanted to ask him about. I wanted to ask about the Mueller investigation, about staff changes, about Khashoggi, and I thought, let's just talk about you. We know this president has no problem. The way the question began was, let's talk about the state of Donald Trump. And it was interesting to me, and I will say, not just in the interview, but just the entire time. We spent about an hour with him, the better part of an hour. He was very upbeat. He seemed very comfortable, very at ease in his own skin. I have to say, because it was the first formal interview in these 2 years he's been president, very at ease being the commander-in-chief. He has his command of his brief. He is comfortable in the Oval Office. I mean, he's the president, and he knows it, and he's very much at ease with it. Now, maybe he's mad to staff, but I would say that he was very good-spirited despite some tough, challenging questions in our interview.
Well, in addition to pushing back on the notion that he's angry and lashing out, and maybe some of those stories are overstated, although clearly he's gone on the attack a lot. He said the White House is running like a well-oiled machine. That seemed to be pushing it a little bit. Yeah,
and I would say, you know, as the line goes, I wouldn't be lending any money at this point to either John Kelly or to Kirstjen Nielsen. I mean, he gave them far less than full-throated endorsements. Can you imagine a president saying about a chief of staff ever, well, there's some things about him I like and there's some things about him I don't like. I mean, I remember when Ronald Reagan made a very, very mild statement about Don Regan when I was covering him in '87. We all knew right away he was dead.
It certainly didn't give credence to the notion that he's definitely staying as chief of staff through 2020. But let me ask you also, it had just broken when you sat down with the president, the judge's ruling for CNN restoring Jim Acosta's credentials in that lawsuit against the White House. And he kind of said it was no big deal. We're going to play that later in the program, Chris. But right after that press conference, let me take you back, you went on the air and talked about how you, as a former White House correspondent, felt about Acosta's behavior. Let's take a look.
I've never seen anything like it. I covered the White House with Ronald Reagan for 6 years. I mean, most of the people there were serious reporters asking serious questions, but Jim Acosta, I thought, embarrassed himself to death.
And after that, a CNN executive did something extraordinary, put out a statement attacking you and saying, hey, Chris, Acosta doesn't work for state TV. Must be hard to sleep at night. What did you make of that?
I slept fine that night. Well, they were pushing back, and then I doubled down on it a few days later because people were asking. It was obviously a hot story. And I noticed that whoever the person was at CNN, who I'd never heard of, didn't fire back. There are two things. Like a lot of things in life, there can be two things that are both true. One, I thought that Jim Acosta embarrassed himself. I thought he misbehaved. I had never seen anything like it. I covered the White House with Sam Donaldson. We were pretty aggressive with Ronald Reagan, but the idea that you'd stand up, first just to say, begin your question by saying, I want to challenge you, Mr. President, and then continue to ask questions, and then when you're told to sit down, to keep standing up and even kind of fight off an intern, I was astonished by it. Having said that,
but then the White House pulls his credentials.
Holding his pass was clearly a bridge too far, and it was a mistake. The president, in his answer to my question about it, and subsequently in a no big deal, I think they were stung by the fact that they lost and that they were, to a certain degree, trying to downplay a defeat. I will say I had talked to a couple of White House aides beforehand, and before the ruling came down, and they said, we're hearing at 60-40 we're going to lose. So they weren't shocked by the ruling by the judge.
Yeah, but it did put most of the media, including Fox News, in the position of siding with CNN. But that's not the same as condoning Jim Acosta's behavior. But that's a distinction that you just made, but that sometimes gets lost on people.
Absolutely.
I had this experience a half dozen times during the campaign. What would you say is the most challenging thing about interviewing Donald Trump?
You ask him a question, and he will give you an answer, but sometimes there's a lot of other stuff around it. For instance, my first question was, how dark is your mood? And he proceeds to go into, he's fine, which kind of would have been the answer, but then he talks about the White House, then he went into the cemetery, and on and on.
Right.
And so you end up having to edit him, not in any way to censor him, but because you're trying to get the answer out of the camouflage, out of the underbrush.
Mm-hmm. You said to him quite bluntly that what you call fake news is sometimes news that you don't like. President pushed back very hard on that. But his supporters not only, I think, revel in the attacks on the press, but at the same time, it is true, as you noted, that a lot of the coverage of this president, whether it's warranted or not warranted, is negative. So it's not like he doesn't have something of a case in lashing out at the media coverage.
Well, this gets us back to the Acosta confrontation and the question I asked him, which was, why did you call on him in the first place? And to a certain degree, there seemed to be, a perfect symbiosis here. The president knows if I call Acosta, he'll do something obnoxious, and that'll just fire up my base. I don't think he thought Acosta was going to go as far as he did, and Acosta gets the spotlight to do something and get a lot of attention. It went further, I suspect, than either of them wanted, but I think they knew at the moment that the president called on Acosta, this was going to be a pothole, and they would both be able to play it to their benefit.
Chris Wallace, thanks very much for sitting down with us.
Thank you.